that. Okay, so I'll just start from the top. I'm Rebecca Harden, professor in the environmental justice field of specialization at the School for Environment and Sustainability here at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. So that in that capacity, I have worked with colleagues and students to experiment with why it is that if you're a young professional and you want to learn something like law, you learn case studies. And if you want to learn something like medicine, you learn from case studies, or business, you learn from case studies. But in environmental fields, we don't really have that kind of accessible pedagogy. So we began this platform Gala as a way of experimenting with creating case studies about environment and sustainability. And it has morphed into an open source, open access, collaborative process that spans institutions like the ones where our keynote speaker today has been educated and from which he will be sharing knowledge with us. So I'm very delighted to be able to feature a whole collaborative axis, really, which Franck has enabled and led over the last several years. I first met Franck, Dr. Binze Bi Kumbe, in Gabon with an internally funded Michigan project that was called Researching Fresh Solutions to Energy, Water, and Food in Resource-Constrained Environments. And this was like Gala, actually, this was a funded project that was set to mark the 200th anniversary of the University of Michigan, with some very new thinking about how we engage in partnerships, how we engage in research and teaching and learning. And what I should say is that, and what I think Franck will help us understand better today, is that we really did go to Gabon thinking that we might partner with Gabonese who, in a very different infrastructural and pedagogical context, were innovating around food, water, and energy in different ways than we need to do here in Michigan, in the Rust Belt. We had not thought as carefully about what that meant as Franck's research now has. And we all were learning together, but we began by taking some prototype case studies and just saying, hey, can we translate these prototypes into French? And, all of our colleagues that we had identified in conservation and development and renewable energy programs at various universities in Gabon said, well, you really need a very skilled linguist. You need a Gabonese student who can really speak French, who knows this area, can use colloquial French well, but also English. Franck Binze Bi Kumbe is your guy. Well, poor Franck showed up at the Albert Schweitzer Hospital grounds in Lambaréné, Gabon. And there we were with, welcome to our project, our workshop. We're doing this effort to collaborate with villagers and local politicians and academics from vocational and scientific and educational institutions. Could you translate these case studies for us to pilot in these groups and see if they're useful and if they could be adapted to these learning contexts? So if I recall, Franck, and correct me if I'm wrong, you stayed up almost all night long translating this case, which I'll drop back in the chat again, about wolves on Gala. This was the first translational act in your collaboration with Michigan, and many of you on the call will be translating Gala content for the Translate-a-thon in the coming days. So I want you to know you've got a trail blazed for you by a very brave individual, because Michigan's take on wolf hunting keeps flip-flopping every time we have a new election. When we have a certain political party in power in our legislature, wolves can be hunted. And then when another one gets elected, the hunt is canceled. It is a major conflict politically in our state. And as Franck was translating and implementing this case study in Gabon, he was teaching it to people for whom that same conflict was very alive, about elephants in Gabon. So there were a lot of really emotional simulations that, the stakeholder positions that people inhabited and they acted out about policy decisions on hunting got pretty heated. And when we saw this dramatic, excitable, laughter, anger, finger pointing, people spitting in each other's faces, acting out the policy conflicts, we thought, oh, we might be onto something here. So we did more translation, and Franck began to work on a second case that was actually more in line with some of his emerging interests in water, which he'll be talking about with us today. Franck has had the distinction of translating this case about 1,4-dioxane contamination of our water here in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And through doing that, he also helped to build collaborative relationships between water experts at our College of Engineering, our utility in Ann Arbor, and water experts from universities and utilities in Gabon. So there's just an enormous amount of work that Franck has made possible through his translational excellence in new approaches to collaboration. And I think that's probably the best introduction I can give you, is that this is someone without whom many of the innovations in collaborative work on wildlife, on water, intractable problems could not have been done. Of course, we've also been useful to Franck in some ways. But by the time we met Franck, he had already done a master's degree at the University of Yaoundé II, or Yaoundé II in Cameroon, in the capital of Cameroon, Yaoundé, in geopolitics and geopolitical strategy. So clearly Franck was already thinking at wider regional and international scales about what kinds of collaborative relationships were needed. And then he returned and worked at the University of Omar Bongo in Libreville for a master's degree in anthropology from an excellent department there that is widely known for its expertise in indigenous thought and heritage and patrimony, and in particular, linguistical and lexical contributions to how we talk about conservation and development and conflict in those arenas. So Franck had 2 master's degrees by the time we met him. Nonetheless, he was very eager to come to Ann Arbor, Michigan, in order to master more lab techniques and scientific techniques about water quality, and to master even more fluent English language. Because as you all may know, the university and educational systems in Gabon have been shaped by the French colonial relationship. So as we sat together at the Albert Schweitzer Hospital, which was an iconic site of colonizing white saviorism, right? Like Albert Schweitzer is the ultimate he's like the OG white savior. But he also really was interested in Gabonese music and Gabonese architecture. He was trying in his own limited colonial way to blend indigenous knowledge. The question today is, what's the next step? What are we doing this generation that moves beyond those colonial efforts and where they fell down and left, instead of opportunities, constraints and cages that all too often limit people, like the learners in classrooms in Gabon, from engaging as fully as they should to shape global systems? So that's where Franck comes in. And Franck, I'll give you the microphone to talk to us about your journey. I'm so excited to hear from you today.
Well, thank you so much, Prof. Aldine. I like to call you Mama Rebecca.
Franck is a very recent PhD. He's been Dr. Binze Bi Kumbe only several months, because after he left the University of Michigan, he went to the University of Western Cape and completed a PhD in language and literacy in the Faculty of Education there, under the direction of my colleague Rahendra Chetty, who is a specialist in decolonized education and accessibility of education for the poor. So I'm just so excited to introduce you. You're fine with introducing me as Mama Rebecca, but I'm excited to introduce you for the first time publicly as Dr. Binze Bi Kumbe.
Thank you so much. Okay, well, thank you very much for inviting me to the virtual conference, Translate-a-thon. I'm going first to thank all the people attending this conference. I guess you are from many different parts of the world. It's good to know that I'm speaking to such audience. So greetings from Gabon, Libreville. Well, let me share. Okay, everybody can see this?
Yes,
I can see it, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Oops. Okay. So this is me, Dr. Franck Binze Bi Kumbe. This is me doing field research in Gabon, specifically in Lambaréné, south central of Gabon. And I would like to say that Gabon is one of the good parts in the world and the future of this planet in terms of water sources. Okay. Okay. Today I will speak about translation and decolonization, mostly around the issue of water in Gabon, Gabon's rural areas. I will speak more specifically about approaches to translate streaming from theories that link decolonial thought with local knowledge and identity. To begin, I will offer an overview of translation related to the educational environment and the personal history of my engagement with University of Michigan. I will discuss translation versus the consideration of linguistic varieties of the local and national language. I will also discuss translation versus local systems of beliefs and social considerations or interpretations. I will close with reflections on translation and decolonial perspectives. Okay, yes. Sorry. Okay. This slide is my first main point about translation related to the education level. I would like to first encourage all of you to enter with me into a spirit of cross-cultural exchange and partnership, for which language is a key. It brings us all to a place of humility, but also new power and the locks it opens, and often those within our own societies where intractable challenges can feel overwhelming, but must be confronted for the future of humanity and of non-human lives in our world. Translation refers to a process which consists of converting a text from a language A, for example, into a language B, in order to facilitate the understanding of the text content among the language B speakers. So we do not translate for, sorry. Sorry, okay. We do not translate for ourselves. we translate for our interlocutors, learners, or for the public to whom we would like to send a particular message, or with whom we would like to share a particular knowledge. In doing this, every relevant or quality translation shall take into account some parameters specific to the public or the community which we would like to reach. Like in the slide, most of time I translate from English into French and from French into local language or a vernacular language. Translation must be in accordance with the education level, because in most rural communities in Gabon, where I'm doing field research, people do not go beyond grade 10. Therefore, I think the terminologies used in the translation must be adapted to their language education level to help them to better understand the study case, for example, they are learning. For example, it's better for them to use colloquial French instead of standard French, or it's better to use something like short or simple sentences, or better again, to use images to explain more. And I think this is what I did in Lambaréné in 2016 when I translated the case study in the human-wildlife conflict. But this does not mean that those people are poorly educated. For education, I think, can be subjective. You know, education is related to the social and cultural environment where we live. I think more and more that education refers to quality skills to accommodate or to adapt with modes of thinking, of doing, of living and being, which are promoted or defended in a specific society. That's why sometimes I say there is on one side indigenous education and on the other side Western education. So here in my slide, you can see the translation from English to into French, and the text here is in French, and here the text is in vernacular language, Gisi, where Gisi is a language from the Gisi community, one of the main community in central Lambaréné when I'm doing field research. For example, filtrage de l'eau. So this is a filter system in Gisi is called Olek Mamba, or when it's important to wash hands before eating. In Gisi, they say sus makak mo uya. Next slide. here, it's some linguistic variation between local and national expert language. I drawn on the examples of Keri village and Ingeja village in Gabon, where respectively the main local language is Gisir and Galois, with French as national language. What I call linguistic varieties include jargons and verbal codes, as well as the local population themselves practice or interpret them. So here, method of water treatment, often called technology in places like Michigan, but such are called at most method or practice in Keri and in Genja, or simply referred to by their name, like a procedure. Down here, we have here a shallow pit and a water hole, and here an open well. But the term frequently used in Ngenja or Keri is simply well. So there is no very difference between shallow pit, water hole, or well. It's the same, and they are using the term well. Next slide. Okay, translation.
I think you missed one. You have to go back.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. Okay. Yeah. Okay, this is my third main point, which is a translation. Oh, sorry. Come on. Okay, translation versus some systems of belief and social realities and interpretations. In Gabon, some water sources or rivers are considered as divinities, especially when Memiwata are there, or if human purification rituals are carried out there. So while water can be a source of danger and trade, it is not a biological danger for locals to drink. Because sacred sources are seen as suitable for consumption, but dangerous to swim or travel, of course. What does it mean? But regardless of the bacteria that can be found in sacred or local water sources, it is seen as absolutely good to drink. In many parts of rural Gabon, germs in food or water are not seen as dangerous to Black people. Maybe in the past, exposure to many pathogens create strong immune systems, but today with chemical contamination from mining and other industries, this is very complicated, very complicated. I have some problem with my slides. Okay. But yeah, now my fourth main part, translation and decolonial perspective. But before going ahead, let me get back. Please note that when I use the term versus, like translation versus local systems of beliefs, or translation versus social realities considerations, I would like to refer to a kind of local terminologies that can influence positively, the translation. In other words, there can be some fact of elements of the local language. I mean, the language that serves for translation, that can help to improve the translation process. So versus here, it's not absolutely something that's against the fact of translating and or giving or right or quality translating. No, it's simply related to kind of right local elements of language that can help to improve or to better formulate our translation process. Okay, for my fourth point, translation and decolonial perspective, I will draw primarily on personal reflection to offer critical context, suggesting a sense of relation accountability to place, like water bodies, to people, like communities where I have learned and taught, and to collaborative learning with varied partners, including new modes of partnership across institutions and learning communities. Here, yeah, here it's RISE, the Research Institute for Sustainability and Education, and I would like to say in which I'm involved since the year 2016, and the main campus in Lambaréné, campus at Albert Fraser Hospital in Lambaréné. And Prof. Hardin was saying in the introduction, she was explaining more about Albert Fraser, who was really this man trying to explain more about who he is and what he did in a relationship with or interaction with what we call decolonization, if really it was in accordance with decolonization thought, or or trying to switch on decolonization and the big, doctor he was. I would like to say that Albert Schweitzer maybe was impressive man, but we don't know exactly if we can say absolutely he was a good man. Because at this time, and Lambaréné is at the center of Gabon and was one of the first party in Gabon to meet colonizers, and I mean to meet or to face against European systems of control and colonization. So that's why the question is important, but it's not what I'm focused today. Okay, so this is just a little parenthesis. So with RISE, I was collaborating on development of curriculum with USTM, EOB, University of Marbongo, and University of Michigan, and Technical High School to focus on renewable energy, water quality monitoring and protection, and the project management and entrepreneurial skills. So with RISE, when I was teaching people from Ingeja village how to treat drinking water by using ceramic water filter technology, as well as how to clean the filter, these filters, I was pleasantly surprised to see them help us. I mean, a group of students from the University of Michigan and me as a research facilitator. They showed us indigenous teaching and learning methods. Indeed, they taught us to observe how they interpret what we have taught them, and that we should evaluate if they have assimilated the lesson or the training. But earlier, they told us to talk or explain a lot while teaching them the process of treating the water. Rather, they preferred us to practice more so that they could observe and practice to better understand. This allowed me to understand that they had their own way of doing and understanding things. Therefore, I began to question myself about indigenous method of knowledge transfer. Indeniably, I have learned from indigenous communities alternative pedagogical systems to contribute to innovations in the process of knowledge production and knowledge acquisition. And today, I completed my PhD and have become, across countries, universities, schools, and communities as well, one of the singers and defenders of a context-rich education system, in particular, what sometimes I call contextualized education. And in general, a blended pedagogical system shaped by both indigenous and Western teaching and learning systems. Here, I would like, for this slide, to express the pillars of new knowledge systems. Relative to dominant formal education, inherited from colonial systems, indigenous pedagogies have learned the following. They are experiential, I mean, not only analytical, they are relational, not only abstract, also rich with elements of repetition and as dialogue, not based absolutely on performance and assessment. As conclusion, I would like to conclude my talk by calling for effective open teaching and learning systems, or an effective open access research on knowledge production and acquisition, as suggests the spirit of both Gala and Translate-a-thon. This refers to the detachment from the universal idea of knowledge and education production, because the existence of many cultural civilizations suggests the existence of many different sources of knowledge and diversity in perception and conception of education. Yeah, this is a kind of joke. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Franck. Especially given that you have a new child who is under 1 week old. I think that's pretty remarkable that you opted to spend this afternoon with us. I want to thank you for that. And if you want to stop sharing screen, then we can actually have a little bit of a conversation as you work your way back to where you're needed most right now. This was so thought-provoking and so beautifully put together. Let me open I see a few comments in the chat. I noticed that Steve picked up on the point about, adapting translation to the education level of end users, which I think has a lot of resonance for a lot of us who are thinking about how we can adapt our knowledge to both vocational and more research-based audiences. So I think that is a very, very interesting point. And that's that first slide you had with the English to French translation, and then the other forms of translation, including lexicons of use. Really interesting points. Are there any other even informational questions or comments or reflections on any of your own experiences as mediators and translators of knowledge that any of you wants to share here in these last few minutes on the keynote part of our time together at the Translate-a-thon?
Okay, we have a question in the in-person space. Would you please go ahead?
Great.
Hello. So I wanted to know if it would be acceptable for me to pose this question in French.
Of course.
Ok. Donc, je vous remercie beaucoup, Franck, pour votre présentation. J'ai beaucoup apprécié vos idées, et en particulier cette dernière idée sur une pensée plurielle d'éducation. Ça m'intéresse beaucoup. Alors, en fait, moi, je suis bénévole dans une organisation ici à Détroit qui s'appelle Freedom House. Et avec Freedom House, je travaille en tant que traductrice et interprète. Et je voudrais savoir, est-ce que vous avez des conseils sur la traduction ou l'interprétation pour quelqu'un qui fait tel travail sans une formation, disons, formelle en traduction? Merci.
And I'll just, I'm typing in the chat the translation into English as you talk, but I'll just summarize that last question in English, which is, do you have advice for people who are thrust into interpretive roles who don't have any formal training as interpreters or translators? What are your words of advice to us? Which in many ways, Franck, takes me back to you staying up all night in Lambaréné, translating cases for some of us on this call, and you really handled it well. What are your words of advice or counsel? Quel conseil pour ceux qui n'ont pas forcément une formation?
Okay, I would like to know, I have to answer in French or in English? I think
As you wish, I think.
Ok, je vais peut-être, comme la question a été posée en français, je vais certainement répondre d'abord en français. Et certainement, Prof. Ardine pourra traduire pour nos interlocuteurs en anglais. Alors, quel conseil que je peux donner pour une personne, voilà, qui travaille dans la sphère de la traduction, qui n'a pas eu une formation formelle au départ? Ce que je disais au début, c'est que le plus important déjà, c'est qu'on ne traduit pas pour soi-même. On traduit pour les autres, avec déjà l'intention de leur communiquer ou de partager avec eux une connaissance, une information. Donc, souvent, ce qu'il faut faire, il faut s'adapter, il faut essayer de s'adapter avec le public pour qui on fait la traduction. C'est-à-dire qu'il faut essayer de trouver des mots qui vont être simples pour eux de comprendre, parce que l'objectif est qu'ils vous comprennent. L'objectif n'est pas que qu'ils vous comprennent, qu'ils vous comprennent vous en tant que personne, ou qu'ils comprennent peut-être l'exercice qui est fait, c'est-à-dire la traduction, mais l'objectif, c'est ce que contient la traduction, donc le contenu, le message. C'est ça qu'ils doivent comprendre. Par exemple, si on a en face de nous des enfants, on sera obligé, dans la traduction, d'utiliser des termes appropriés à la compréhension des enfants. Comment un enfant peut comprendre? Donc, c'est déjà baisser d'un rang le niveau de langage et mettre et s'adapter au contexte de l'environnement dans lequel on projette ce message-là qui est traduit. Donc, vraiment, les conseils, il n'y a pas de conseils standards. C'est une capacité à s'adapter à la situation présente. Voilà. C'est une capacité à s'adapter à la situation, au contexte. C'est une capacité à s'adapter au contexte. On ne peut pas dire qu'il y a des conseils standards, surtout pour une personne qui n'a pas eu une formation dans ce domaine-là, dans cette perspective, dès le départ. Donc, voilà ce que je peux dire. J'espère que j'ai plus ou moins répondu à la question. Je reprends en disant qu'il n'y a pas de conseil standard à part le simple fait de trouver vous-même une capacité de vous adapter au contexte dans lequel vous traduisez, sachant que vous traduisez pour les autres afin qu'ils comprennent le message, puisque vous-même, vous connaissez votre propre message. Les autres doivent comprendre aussi le message pour que vous soyez au même titre ou à la même connaissance de l'information. Voilà.
Merci.
I think I've got most of it in the chat for those who didn't master the French. we are having a bilingual keynote. How appropriate for a Translate-a-thon. And how, challenging for those of us in North America to be working with colleagues like yourself, Franck, who probably speak, not just one or two, but 3 or 4 or 5 languages and have since you were children. It's wonderful. Yeah. Anything further on that question? I will just read out that last summary statement you made, Franck, which was, you said, I will close by saying that there's no rigid or standard frame of right and wrong translation practice that you should be intimidated by if you are called upon without formal training. Rather, you just work to constantly improve your own capacity to capture and convey a message, not word for word fidelity, but the message. And you do it in a context with an audience. And those capabilities of mediating between the message and the audience are really what good translation is about. And it is a constant practice where we increase our ability to do that, which is, I think, a very beautiful answer and one that the world could really use a lot more of right now. This week. Yeah, thank you very much for the question, and impressive that you could ask it in French. That's absolutely exciting. Any other questions or comments? There's a question in the chat that's just come in from Eliza about how to deal with other languages that are spoken by immigrants for which there aren't a lot of interpreters or sources of information. And Franck, I do know that, we have another 5 or 6 minutes only until 4 o'clock. So if you're able to stay with us, that's great. And if you need to go, we understand. But this question may pertain as well in Gabon in terms of whether there's a way in which I think this question asks a question about the distributive justice of translation as a service, and whether there are populations and language speakers who just live with a much less abundant amount of resources to translate their languages. Immigrant communities may be groups within Gabon whose language is smaller and less widely spoken, who have a harder time finding translation in the Gabonese national culture. Do you see these kinds of problems of the distribution of translation ability being uneven or inequitable for some language groups, Franck?
Yeah, a question from Elisa Duarte. I think in this context, we need to find first a main language. I mean, a language that is spoken by many people. I mean, the majority of people of a specific group in the context of translation, because we cannot, translate in every language or in whole languages. It looks like it's so difficult or maybe impossible. Yeah. So we need, in this context, to point to a main language. It can be French, if the majority people speak French, or it can be Spanish or English. So it depends on the majority. And we will do with the majority. It looks like, okay, majority sometimes win. Yeah.
Yeah, I actually am reminded by that answer of my time in the Central African Republic, where there had been strong missionary support for a very particular language, Sango. And Sango is not the national language, which is French, but it is I would say, vehicular language of the nation. So many Central Africans learn some Sango, enough Sango that it becomes kind of the meeting place where, people with more and less French or different mother tongues can meet and transact, right? So I think your answer is very interesting because it suggests that maybe in some ways, in a context like Gabon, or maybe the US for immigrant populations, a dominant language that exists as a lingua franca because of power asymmetries can become or be in a way appropriated as a vehicular language where people can meet, but not have to live and have to use it all the time, right? I think theoretically, that's a very interesting answer. But it's complicated. It's complicated.
Yeah,
And there is this problem that, there is sometimes a gap or a silence where we wish there could be more translation. There's one more question from Martin about. Sorry, Rebecca.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I just want to say that Steve has his hands up. Would you please speak? Tell us your question, Steve.
Thank you for seeing my hand. I don't know who's pointed that, but thank you very much. I'm just putting my camera on as well, so you may see me. Some of you don't know me and never met me. I have to lower my hand as well. I don't have a specific question. Actually, I have a lot of comments, but I won't just mention them. Otherwise, I'm going to spend the rest of the night on my side. It's nighttime. It's almost 10 here. But I just want to point to things, which I felt like Franck was a bit cautious. Maybe he didn't want to to sell out himself. First of all, thank you very much, Franck, for the presentation. Very insightful, very informative.
Thanks,
Congratulations. I should say that this is one of the rare moments that I've seen you presenting an academic paper. But thank you very much. My point is just two that I want to mention. I have a lot of them. I can show you my piece of paper I was writing, taking notes. Just two that I want to mention. The one, but when you kind of you put it as a question with regard to Albert Schweitzer. You just said, was he a good man? And then you didn't comment, you didn't add anything. So I just want to add a comment onto that, because we all know that Albert Schweitzer is actually he is, I can also say he is, although he is no longer alive. He's a Nobel Peace Prize winner. So from that standard, we can, as it is well known, but he was a good man. But unfortunately, and this is an information that I'm just going to throw to my, to the audience, and most of the attendees in the audience are Western people. So if something that you may not know is that actually, what we know or what has been written about Althusser is actually, I would say, like, it's just one side of a story. And because there are now a lot of a number of Gabonese historians, and especially people that actually that lived in that area where Nambarene, and most of them, they had actually a parent and grandparent that worked with Albert Schweitzer. Now they actually pointing out some of the, let's say, untold stories, some of the things that were never documented, some realities that I'll say were kind of inhumane for that time. So that's why actually nowadays when you go to Gabon and especially Lambaréné, most people still have some respect towards Albert Schweitzer, but many, especially the younger generation, but now reading some things that are told by locals, he's no longer a hero. So that's I just wanted to give us as comment, because Franck left it as an open question, saying, was he really a good man? So that's the first comment. The second one, I'm going to also be quite short. It's actually, I'll say it, that side, a bit of that side of me, Franck, but I do embrace the decoloniality theories with my own reserve, and something that I've always been, with Professor Chetty, we have been having some discussion and debate on this. Something that I've been kind of making me not really good about this is actually what I'll call the practicabilities of implementing these theories within education and education, social development in the, let's say, in the South, in the what is called the global South context. So that's where I wasn't. I've never been happy with decolonial theories. I've always been pointing out at what I mean. I see that in the audience we have somebody from Senegal. So I've been always pointing out at what my beliefs should be. What Léopold Sédar Senghor used to say: le rendezvous donner et du recevoir. So that's where I see the coloniality theories. But then with what you just mentioned, in the indigenous method, you said that you were teaching some methods and then you moved to indigenous method because you think that's best, which I think that's where actually decolonial theories should go, where actually we should actually not reject what comes from the West, but try to accommodate what works best for us coming from the West, and what should be practical in the current context from our indigenous knowledge. Because it is true that what we know as development, I often say it to some of my students, actually, development, it's a natural process within each civilization. Now, the moment two civilizations meet, and then there is one that is coming as a dominant force, so of course, one development, natural process of one civilization will suffer and it will stop. That's where we are now. And with your thesis, with you, the findings of your thesis and of your research, it's kind of trying to restore that, where, okay, yes, we have a stopped development, but you can still restore that process of development and try to implement what our ancestors used to do to purify water or to have better food or things like that. So that's yeah. So I would like to congratulate you on this work. I'm very happy. Thank you, Franck. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Steve. Thank you for your comment.
And I've been taking some notes in the chat, including acknowledging the excellent questions about national language culture and kind of post-colonial national language culture from Martin Benjamin, which I think we won't have time to discuss in person, given the way the time is fleeting. But I will say that both the questions from Steve and Martin and the comments are pushing us to really think more deeply about what the implications of this decolonial theory may be for a next generation of collaborative educational and research and pragmatic, building of communities. I won't say building of nations, perhaps something other than nations. I don't know, right? So this is a very interesting moment. And I put in the chat a link to a recent program funded by the United States National Science Foundation. It is a very, very new kind of spending. It's for a center that will braid indigenous and scientific knowledge in some of the ways that I think Franck's dissertation calls for, and in the ways that Steve is suggesting may be more constructive than a radical rejection of all that has emerged from the violence of colonialism. I think that there are detractors of this approach of blending and braiding. There are those who would usefully perhaps defend a more radical vision. I also think that, we're in a moment of a grand experiment about this, which is about whether through such approaches we can restore better relations of reciprocity between humans and nature. So it's a very exciting moment. Franck is revising some of his work from his dissertation, which, unlike the talk today, is incredibly densely citationally rich, with many, many, many theorists, many of whom are African or from diasporic African intellectual communities. So I want to commend your scholarship, Franck, for privileging these debates within and among non-dominant, Euro-dominant scholarship circles as a step first toward thinking and conceptualizing. And I really look forward to the chapter that you're revising in a book that we are submitting to the University of Michigan Press, and other articles that will come from your dissertation. They will be so important as contributions, but so are these conversations like you catalyzed today. I can't think of a better way to start off our work together this weekend on the Translate-a-thon. I want to thank Julie Evershed. I want to thank all of the students and alumni. I see alumni from Brazil, Vitor. I see staff here today, Brenda, who have been part of building these programs. We have a wonderful combination of types of collaborators from the Michigan Matrix and our global partner institutions like Western Cape on this event today. And that itself is precisely, that's a decolonial process in my view, because clearly the hierarchies that separate professors from students and staff, you know, we're taking those apart today on this call. And that is where we start, where we work and live. So I want to thank you, Franck, for enlivening our community, and to all of you who turned up today at the start of your weekend, deepest gratitude. Keep us posted, Julie, as the Translate-a-thon proceeds late into the night and tomorrow. And it's so exciting what you all are doing. Do you have a final word?
Well, I just wanted to say thank you so much, both of you, Rebecca and Franck, for joining with us for this keynote. And I'm really excited about this collaboration because I think it's so rich with potential. And these are the types of experiences we really want to give our students, because how many of our language students actually want to go on into literature? So finding different avenues for students to create paths to develop their language and better understand cultural interpretation and, you know, everything you talked about today, Franck. So thank you very much for kicking us off and giving us a lot of great content to think about as we start in our own translation.
Thank you.
Let us know when the recording is available. Franck?
Yes.
It's a pleasure. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for attending the conference. And bye.
Thank you.
Julie, can you save the chat?
Absolutely. I've got the chat and the transcript saved. So
Wonderful resources. Martin, thank you so much for sharing. I'll be in touch next week and we'll keep this conversation going. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Everyone.